What's going on? This is Mike Rossi with the 4th episode of Shooting Sharp. This one's going to be called Opening the Beyond, as we're going to do an interview with Beyond Wrestling. What do you call yourself these days?
Founder.
Owner.
That's
a good way to go. Founder, owner, insert title here. You've done it all. But yeah, this is the 4th episode, so we're going to kind of move away from the wrestling recaps of the week, the previews. Let's do a little bit of interviews with Drew Cordeiro here from Beyond Wrestling. How you doing today, Drew?
I'm good. I had a nice day off today, which is rare, especially with what we've got coming up. But I live for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
If it was up to me, I'd run a show every day. So
if you're not busy, you're not living.
Right.
All right. So now, Drew, you are doing a lot these days. You got Beyond Wrestling. You've got now 2 incarnations of Wrestling Open coming down the pipeline. And then you're also with the Bio Pro Wrestling School. So first and foremost, we're going to run through the Beyond Wrestling story. There's a lot of new listeners catching up here, so I want to catch them up with what you do.
Cool.
So what led you to start Beyond all the way back in 2009 in Ohio?
All right, I'll give you the speedrun recap. I had a couple friends in high school. One was really into tape trading. The other was into doing e-feds. And through the tape trading, one of my buddies got a backyard wrestling tape, and he's like, we could do this. And my other friend that did the feds with the emails and the rolling of the dice in the chat rooms and stuff like that was like, oh, I can put the show together. So we did backyard wrestling for a few years, and we came across a message board where a lot of other people in the country were doing backyard wrestling. And, a bunch of our friends graduated high school, went to college. They weren't as into it. So there was a few of us that still wanted to do it. And we realized that there were like similar clusters all around the country. So through the backyard wrestling like message board, we would go to like Chattanooga, Tennessee, different parts of Ohio, different parts of like the Pacific Northwest, where we would meet up with other people that were still actively involved in backyard wrestling, but couldn't like do standalone like events or shows or whatever. Through this process, I met a ton of people that were professionally trained, but they were still doing backyard wrestling. And I thought it was really strange because, we never had access to a ring or, any sort of professional training. And it was the freedom of the performance. So the idea behind Beyond Wrestling was, let's do one of our backyard wrestling shows, but let's only invite people that have professional training. The wrestlers will act as the audience. We'll tape the matches. We'll put them on YouTube. And it attracted other independent wrestlers that weren't even in our circle who liked the freedom and flexibility to be able to present themselves the way that they wanted to. Obviously, all wrestling was like super commoditized. There was no free wrestling at that time. Everything was getting released on a DVD. Like it was a commodity in order to be able to have like even an individual match. Like Chikara would show clips with the podcast to Go-Go was basically as far as it went, or it was on TV. So for us to be putting matches for free on YouTube helped build a resume for, these wrestlers. Hey, this is the way that I can be presented. This is how I want to wrestle. Took it out to promoters. And within 2 years, I felt like we had a strong enough following that we started doing live events in different parts of the country. Because back then it was like, Dragon Gate USA, Chikara, they were touring, even though they'd only, play to like 60, 80 people. But they had the video, backing it up with their DVD sales and stuff like that. That was a bit misguided for us in, 2011, 2012, trying to take the show on the road and trying to figure out really what Beyond Wrestling as a live experience looked like. Fast forward to 2013, we had our first show at Fet Music, American Rana, which was a name that has no significance other than the fact that it's a word that didn't exist. I thought it'd be easier to kind of track feedback on social media. And that's when things really took off with Beyond Wrestling. So it went from wrestling for wrestlers, no fans in attendance, putting the matches on YouTube, thinking that we had enough buzz to try and take the show on the road. A couple of years of trying to figure out what that looks like. And then, 2013, taking all of the YouTube money that we earned at that point. And if the first American Rana flopped, we wouldn't be having this interview right now.
Yeah, it's funny. It's kind of like how a lot of companies talk. Like even Vince back in 84 with WrestleMania put all his money into that. If that flopped, he was done too. So now American Rana kind of has become your WrestleMania over the years. I think that's fair to say. Was that always your vision, or was that just kind of like your kickstart event, in the new venue?
No, I don't think that there was ever any sort of idea when we did the first one that there would be something that was annual, especially because back then the way that the booking was we didn't even have titles because we didn't know month to month who was going to be there. And it was, opened up the opportunity for different wrestlers to headline the show and have it not feel out of place. Oh, how come the champion's not on last? How come the champion didn't come out second for the introduction? The things that, the tropes that the fans kind of hold on to and feel strongly about. And I think that was kind of the same thing. It's like, I don't want one event to feel more important than the other. But when it came around time to be able to do another, okay, we've been doing shows for a year. It felt like it was the right move to make American Rana a signature event. I think the only other real signature annual event that we have now is Heavy Lies the Crown. Kind of similar thing to be able to do the show at White Eagle on New Year's Eve every year. Although I guess we'll have to see what's in store for 2025.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll get into that for sure. 2013, you also started running secret shows, which, that kind of bleeded in a little bit to like kind of what you're doing now in a weird way. But, what was the idea with those secret shows and what kind of led you to do those?
Well, when we were doing the initial run of, 2009 to 2011 Beyond Wrestling, the no fan matches and stuff like that, the idea was the wrestlers were wrestling for the wrestlers. It was this like kind of pure artistic expression. There wasn't a lot of restrictions. What if we had, because the practicality of like, hey, get 20 people to come out to, Fall River, Massachusetts, where we moved tapings to at one point, or, Allentown, Pennsylvania, or Leary, Ohio, where we originally did it. It's like, well, as long as there's a camera crew, like different schools can host it. And then entire communities of wrestlers can get together. It didn't take off because the quality of the footage was so poor and it was always mismanaged and mishandled. And I didn't realize at the time how lucky we had it with our initial set of production equipment. Even though it was the wrestlers holding the cameras, all of the footage was uniform and it was all relatively high quality. I think we shot on digital 8s back then, and we used a FireWire to transfer the footage in. It wasn't even HD, but it was as good a video quality as we could get. But like the 4 times, like I've got matches with Ricky Starks that did Beyond Wrestling that have never seen the light of the day because the quality of the footage was so poor. Like almost like, what were those flip things called? Those flip cameras that like were almost like handheld. They look like,
I know what you're talking about. I can't think.
They had the button on the side and it would pop the USB out. Like it just wasn't up to standard. And what would happen is each time we would do a release, I'll be like, I'll roll the dice with one of these new tapings and put one of the matches up with somebody high profile. And I'd go back and I would see that putting the match up because the video quality was so poor was causing people to unsubscribe from our YouTube channel. So it was counterintuitive. So we experimented. I mean, I have matches with Pete Dunne and Mark Andrews, matches with Moose and AR Fox and probably Jonathan Gresham at the WWA 4 school. We did a taping in Chicago. I think that Jordan Grace was on. So some heavy hitters in the world of pro wrestling in 2025 were involved in these tapings, but the footage exists somewhere on a hard drive, but unfortunately it was not something at the time that worked because, like having Tanya and, now we have like Jimmy Ray and John Roy and, back then having like Nick and all the other people that did production first of the years, like really took for granted that that's something that we could like scale and replicate. So the right intention, but the wrong technology at the time. And I think the best we tried to do with it is like, somebody like Danny Cannon was like a breakout star from those tapings. It's like, okay, let's try and get him to the main shows, in Rhode Island Fet Music at the time, so he can perform in front of the live crowd. But it never really panned out past that.
Right. What I really liked about those when you were doing them was you do like the secret show in the afternoon and then the Fet show at like 5, 6 at night. So you got a lot of work for a lot of people during those stretch of days, even if it was just getting their exposure in a new building.
Well, people complain, oh, you'd run 18 matches in a day. Yeah, we ran once a month. We didn't have access to the resources that we have now, where it's like we can run a show, to this upcoming stretch that we're going to have. We've got a show Thursday the 27th, Saturday the 29th, and then Wrestling Open Rhode Island on Monday, March 31st. So we don't have to run 18 matches in a single day. We can run 18 matches over the course of 3 days. But it's always been a numbers game to me. You have to get the talent matches. They have to get feedback on their performances in order to be able to figure out what works, what needs to be improved on. And then they have to get repetitions in front of a crowd to build that special relationship. So, yes, it was a lot to digest, but it always cracks me up. Like, I know that you're a longtime Beyond fan. People used to say, like, 4 or 5 hour shows. Why don't you do shorter shows? And now right. And now we do shows that are 90 minutes, 2 hours. And it's like, oh, I thought that's what you guys wanted. And it ends up being like kind of a separate audience. So,
yeah, people complain no matter what.
Yeah. So, and that's fine too. I think the customer's always right. And we just got to find more customers that agree with us than disagree with us so we can stay in business.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2015, you started expanding out to Somerville at a pretty cool venue called Arts of the Armory with a show that was called Powder Keg. That was really your first jump out of Providence for a while. What kind of led you down that path? We're just trying to get into Boston. How'd that look?
I think Stash Pages was pushing, man. I don't know if he had some sort of ulterior motive. But I think stuff with Fett just wasn't, the writing was on the wall at that point. And it was kind of like, we can't put all of our eggs in one basket. And, being able to expand to Boston, being able to expand to Worcester made sense because it was within an hour driving distance. Being able to do that first show, Arts at the Armory, I mean, that was kind of it's funny. When Biff left, it was the start of our hottest streak that we ever had with, consecutive sold out shows. And it was cool doing Powder Keg. That's a cool venue. Arts at the Armory is a cool venue. I wouldn't say that the doors closed going back there, but for the physical size of the building, and then just because of weird fire laws in Massachusetts, what legal capacity is, what the rental fees are to be there and stuff like that, it's not always the best bet financially. It's a great place to go when you have a sponsor that's able to pick up the tab. But that was a sold out show for us. And that was like, wow, like word has spread that, we can do well on the road. And that was the day after the Greatest Rivals round robin. So that was legitimately the first show we ever did without Biff. Sold out, hot crowd. And that started our stretch. And then we ended up leaving Fett Music at the end of, it was the end of 2015. And going to Aurora in downtown Providence, which when we started going to Aurora and when we started going to Electric Haze initially, that was kind of around the same time that a lot of long-term fans would and not just long-term fans of Beyond Wrestling, but people that were professional wrestling fans in the area for decades prior would always bring up like Jack Witchy's like, oh, what is it that you do? And I would say, oh, it's professional wrestling. And they're like, oh, like Hulk Hogan? And I would say, yeah. And they would say, oh, well, there's this place in Attleboro where every Friday night for $5, they would have a wrestling card and Chief Jay Strongbow would come through, blah, blah, blah. And it was just always powerful to me that like, wow, all these years later, these people, I think Jack Witchy's burned down to the end of the 70s, at the start of the 80s. So like, we're talking like 30, 40 years removed. Like these people still vividly remember it and hold it in high regard. What if we did a weekly wrestling show? And I would have, you see a venue the size of Electric Haze or Aurora where capacity's, probably safe at 200. It's like, wow, if we did a weekly show and get 50 or 60 people every week, it would be like an old NWA taping, except with independent wrestling. Wouldn't it be cool if we pursued that? If you ask Jay Rubin, he's going to be the one that says that he got us to Worcester. But I also remember you giving us some leads on some venues as well. And again, kind of same idea, same time. Like, let's expand outside of Providence and see what opportunities they are. It made sense since Boston, Providence, and Worcester were all, forming that equidistant triangle, at least in my mind. I know it's not exactly like that. I prefer the drive on 146 than I do on Interstate 90. Right. I'll tell you that. But going to Electric Haze that first time, same thing, sold out show. And that was during a very, very active stretch for us, I remember, in terms of all the programming that we had. I think we did the tournament for today, which was 2 shows at Aurora. The following week, we did like a classic studio taping, no fans at Nepois. And then it was the week after. So talk about, setting the groundwork for what would eventually become Wrestling Open with how busy our schedule was. The fact that we went to Worcester and sold it out was kind of like, okay, like we're on to something here. And the vibe at Electric Haze is fucking cool. I know this is going to sound weird as hell. When you go in that place, it smells like Electric Haze. And like, that's always something to me where it's like, when you think about the experiences and the venues and the stuff that you remember, like even going back now, just recently, the place still smells the same. And it's a good smell. It's a pleasant smell.
Yeah. It's hookah.
Yeah. It's the hookah. Yeah. No, and they do keep the facility clean to their credit besides that. But like, Electric Haze has a vibe to it that very few places we've ever run can replicate. And so it was cool then, and it's still cool now.
Yeah, I feel like for the fan, like Fett had a vibe, then it got better with Aurora, and then it got better with Electric Haze. I just feel like as you change venues, you kind of were able to capture that a little bit better over time.
People look back and they'd be like, oh my God, you guys used to always have so many more fans at Fett. But like our average turnout at Fett was like maybe 175. We only had like 3 or 4 shows that did like more than 300 fans. The first American,
you just had that higher ceiling, I guess, right? Kind of like the White Eagle did,
right? And plus it was the higher ceiling matched with the balcony,
right?
But there was always so many technical issues at Fett, whether or not their lighting worked, and getting accused of damaging the soundboard, which there's no video evidence for. The
Someone getting stabbed outside.
Oh, right, that was bad, right? And to asking the promoters of the venue or the managers of the venue, like, hey, are we still going to be able to run today? Yeah, come. And then we start setting up the ring. All the wrestlers are there, and the city shuts it down. I mean, that was out of their control. But I could have saved a lot of people a lot of time and money and hassle coming out to the show to not be able to wrestle. Same with the fans too. And they shut it down because they said, oh, we think it might be gang activity. There might be fear of retaliation. Well, you shut down the show, but you let us all congregate in the parking lot outside.
Right, you're all there.
So, if I'm going to come by with a gun and shoot you up, it's going to be easier if you're standing in the parking lot than standing in a closed venue.
Yeah.
There was another time where we were supposed to get in a certain time. There was supposedly a sewage backup and stuff like that. And the fact that we went back to FET in 2024 for 2 shows and it didn't work out is pretty clear indication to me as far as where our fans want to go and what they want to do. And that's not a knock on them. I hope that they're able to kind of rebuild because it's a cool space, do what they got to do. I thought that we could be potentially a part of that and trying to convince people this is a spot worth checking out. And in that regard, we definitely failed. I mean, that last show that we did in October there, I don't even think we had 80 people, which is a pathetic turnout for Beyond Wrestling. But
and especially there, it looks so much worse because there's so much extra space.
Yes, but at least we got to try it. But talking about White Eagle, going back to Electric Haze and stuff like that, when we were, and I am jumping around a little bit, but when we did our run at White Eagle for Wrestling Open, did you ever come to any of the shows there?
Which one?
Just any of the wrestling, like a normal Wrestling Open show, not any of the special ones, but just
a couple at Eagle.
Yeah, so you'd get 2 or 3 rows of fans standing around ringside. You get the fans that were seated up against the ring. And then there'd be this gap. And then you get all these other people that were buying tickets to be around wrestling. And granted, it was cool that, they ponied up the money to be able to basically pay a cover to come drink. Because all the Wrestling Open money gets spread among all the wrestlers. But where that separation is where people were paying attention and they weren't paying attention. So what's great about being back at Electric Haze is it forces everybody in the room to pay attention. There's not a place that you can go hide just to drink and socialize. Yeah. I think that since we've gone to Electric Haze, the run of shows that we've done for Wrestling Open has been. I would put it up there with any run of Wrestling Open that we've had. I think the shows have been spectacular.
Yeah, and it's just Electric Haze just has such a cool look on video with the brick walls.
The brick walls, all of the lighting, the activity in the streets going by. You can see the top of 290. It looks like an underground fight is happening, and it definitely increases the energy in the presentation. So it's great being back there. I can't lie.
For sure. So we'll get back into Worcester here in a minute. Now let's talk about the run of shows you had in Melrose. There were a lot of those were double headers with Evolve, which brought some heavy hitters in, especially when they started working some of the NXT co-branded shows when they would bring in like a Rhea Ripley to do a signing, or once Ciampa blew up, things of that nature. But first and foremost, those Melrose shows, I know that might have been another Stash Pages production trying to sell the beer. But what led you into those shows with Evolve, and how was that whole experience working kind of hand in hand with them?
I think Evolve contacted us and we're like, hey, we want to come to your neck of the woods. You got any leads on venues? And I didn't really have much of anything. And it may have been Stash Pages that found it and suggested it, and then information was relayed, or maybe the Evolve people came across it on their own. That particular part I can't remember, but it was very much like hey, we can't do this on our own. The building's not super expensive, but you're required to have insurance, which then is is more expensive. So then the police detail too, which they have a certain commitment of hours. So the way that it worked out, it always made more sense to do a doubleheader. What was cool about that building is full kitchen, so we could sell food. So when we worked with Evolve, they would let us sell the food, and we would cut them in on some of the money that we made off the food. And the same thing with the beer is you would get a single day permit, and it came in on consignment, which means that anything we didn't sell would go back and we would get charged for it. So it was pure profit. So I know it sounds silly, but what about the cool matches and all the other stuff? It's we have to think about how the business itself operates as well. And it would be hard to not make money leaving Melrose. Between the food and the drinks, even given Evolve their cut. But if it was going back now, and if it was the same rates and stuff like that, there's no way we'd be able to afford to go back. We'd have to run a doubleheader with ourselves, and who knows if it would draw. Other thing that was tough about that building is that even when you did draw, just the way that the seats were all set up, it looked empty. That was the fun that when we did the Beyond Championship Wrestling spoof show, we were we're going to tarp off certain seats to make everybody sit on one side. We had 400 tickets sold for that show, and it still looked empty, even with specifically limiting one side and making sure nobody sat there. But working with Evolve was cool. I've always been big on partnerships. I always kind of have the mentality that they're temporary, right? Somebody's got to get a better somebody's getting the better end of the deal, and it's typically the person that is agreeing to the partnership as opposed to the party that's trying to set it up. So I used to, like, hey, we'll eat shit on this when we worked with Chikara. We'll eat shit with this when we worked on CZI. We'll eat shit with this when we work on Evolve, to some extent, in hopes that more people are watching your show. You're building your reputation. You're getting, your best wrestlers in front of like bookers that can help them, improve the quality of their career and stuff like that. So those were sometimes stressful days just because some of the restrictions in Melrose being a city building as opposed to being privately owned. But we had some pretty good matches there too.
Yeah, there was, if you look at the rosters that you guys would have with Evolve on those shows, it was stacked. Like so many TV wrestlers now. Walter, Keith Lee, Saber, you could go all day. But those are some really cool shows. And I thought that they always had a unique environment because you were sitting, it felt like a bigger deal when you were sitting in like those bleachers style seats.
And you know what? I was so focused back in the day. Oh, it has to be standing room ringside. That's the vibe and stuff like that. And we did that for such a long period of time that I've become so much more open-minded to different formats. I've learned about different audiences and different things to, cultivate specific types of crowds and stuff like that. And again, not to get ahead of ourselves, but like Wrestling Open Rhode Island, it's all seating. Because the way that the facility is set up and because we want to attract a family-friendly crowd and stuff like that, it's going to be the first time that we've specifically promoted shows like where it's our choice and not the venue's choice. And part of that is knowing, hey, we can do shows in Melrose, Massachusetts, and people aren't going to reject it as far as, oh, well, this isn't Beyond Wrestling because we have to sit. Granted, we've got the benefit of Wrestling Open being like a new branch, a new division. But nevertheless, if it wasn't for the shows that we did in Melrose, I wouldn't have as much confidence about it.
Yeah, for sure. So going back to, the first time you came into Worcester with Electric Haze, it was November 2016. Did you feel Worcester was a special place for you right away, or did it take you a little while?
I remember running there regularly. I remember still trying to explore different, like sometimes we do the stuff in Enfield. Sometimes we were doing stuff in Philly. Once Aurora closed down, which I want to say was 2017. It might have been 2018, but Aurora was not long for this world. It was both, wow, this place is the best place that we're running, but also, wow, these people are really taking to us. So it really feels like what the heart and soul of what Beyond Wrestling is, especially in 2025, still gravitates around Worcester, Massachusetts. And, if Aurora was still around, maybe I would feel differently about that. If Arts at the Armory was more accessible, maybe I'd feel differently about that if our programming took off anywhere else. But, let's not forget, like, there was also a period of time before the YouTube channel exploded where we were struggling in Worcester, too. Like, sometimes we would only get, like, 80 or 90 people for a Beyond Wrestling Super Show with, people like Zima Ion and Nick Gage and, some other pretty heavy hitters in wrestling. But that's just how wrestling is,
Waves
of it, but then also, maybe we didn't do a good enough job promoting the show. Maybe it was a great job promoting the show, but it was the wrong combination of wrestlers to make it appealing to the fans. Maybe there was outside factors like other organizations starting up shows and, maybe there was, weather. There's always so many different factors that I kind of, again, having had promoted shows for 16 years now, I can look back and say, okay, it's not just one thing or the other. These are all factors that we have to be concerned about. Sometimes you just don't get lucky,
right.
But you have to try and the format back then was we're going to put everything we have into this one show. Like on some level, even though it wasn't as hyped up, we ran the American Rana format, like show after show.
Right.
Okay, cool. We made $10,000 off this show. Let's spend 20 on the next.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that show lost $5,000. Where's the $5,000 going to come from for the next month? And that's one of the other ideas that kind of went into like Wrestling Open. Like, what can we do to kind of create stability as an organization so that even when we have the weeks where we take the hit, it's minor compared to, oh my God, we're constantly in jeopardy. And during that whole stretch of time, it always felt like as successful as we were, how much hype we were, it was like each show could be our last, or we were 2 or 3 shows away from like this all going away.
Yeah. So 2019 is when you really, you kind of kicked it into gear of Worcester with Uncharted Territory. I think before that you were running like the last Sunday of every month. I don't remember what it actually was. But Uncharted Territory. Yeah. Uncharted Territory, April 3rd, 2019. It was seasonal. So there was a couple of different seasons that you ran. That first one, I always remember being the Wednesday before the WrestleMania 35 run in New York, which I thought was cool because it kind of was like the kickoff to the weekend. A lot of people were making that drive down the next day or two. That was an idea that kind of goes back to that Jack Witchy's idea that I think you were talking about before. So what led to this idea? Was it something you were thinking about for a while to have like a weekly show every Wednesday? Or was it just something that kind of came together quick for you?
No, I mean, we've got to go back to that WrestleMania weekend 2018 where our YouTube channel just absolutely exploded. And how much appeal that gave Beyond Wrestling for different parties that were looking to expand and invest. And, Powerbomb TV was on its own. I felt like Powerbomb TV tried to make good on the promise that Flow Slam, everybody got hyped up for and never actually came to fruition, which is like, what if there was an online streaming place where all wrestling promotions could be? And Powerbomb needed like a heavy hitter promotion. And, we took the assets of Beyond Wrestling. We took the assets of Powerbomb TV. We formed a new company called IWTV. And with IWTV, the announcement of Uncharted Territory came out at the same time that AEW was announced. And it didn't take the piss out of our announcement. That's how I knew we were onto something. And again, same thing. Oh, wow, we're going to do weekly shows at Electric A's. If they draw 60, 70 people, we're going to be golden. But there were some shows where we hit 200 capacity and we're actually turning people away. Raw was live. SmackDown, I don't think, was live at the time. NXT was on the network. 205 Live was live almost every week. AEW hadn't started yet, and TNA was still taped. We were like the third only live weekly wrestling show. Before the pandemic, when everybody was trying to figure out how to scramble to get footage, and everybody, started doing like shorter programming to draw out their releases after doing batch tapings and stuff like that. April 2019. Even before WrestleMania week was like super saturated. April 2019, like we kicked off WrestleMania week. It's a huge streaming event with, Masato Tanaka and SCU and MJF and Kim and Pazuzu and Statlander and Aussie Open, Brian Cage, Jordan Grace, Orange Cassidy. I mean, my God. And when you go back and look at the most star-studded independent wrestling shows of all time, like that's going to be up there. And, Uncharted Territory was like a loss leader for IWTV. In the sense that it really helped build the platform with the amount of subscribers. But the pandemic happened before we could make good on kind of, not to say to cash out, but the pandemic happened and it's like, wow, we're building. Here's our chance to really capitalize on it. And I feel like in some ways we were disproportionately affected as a result. I think we did the first 10 weeks at Electric A's. They started construction on Kelly Square. And then it was like, hey, you're not going to be able to access the building this week. Thank God we had a good relationship with White Eagle by virtue of the American Rana events and the Heavyline, the Crown events that we've done there, that it was like, hey, can you bail us out? Yep, we'll honor the same agreement as Electric A's. Okay, we're just going to move all programming here. And it worked, and there were some episodes of Uncharted Territory, like the one that we did around the 4th of July, where we would have had to have turned people away to Electric A's, but White Eagle was big enough to accommodate. And the only caveat in all of that was obviously like there were certain times that I wanted to go back to Electric A's for smaller shows, like when we'd run the Women's Wrestling Revolution or WWR Plus stuff, where I knew, we might only get 60 people, and that's going to be like a good crowd for what that format is. And Eagle was just kind of like, no, like you're here with us now. And so I always kept in contact with Electric A's, but we couldn't like actively go back there for that reason.
Right. So season 1 ended around July, August 2019.
It was the first Wednesday after American Rana. So it was probably the last Wednesday in July. It was probably like July 30th or July 31st or something like that.
And then you did season 2 exclusively at the Eagle, and that's when you had to switch over to Thursdays because of AEW running Dynamite, right?
Yes. And at one point there was the plan to go to the building in Pawtucket through like a third party sponsor that just, kind of midnight hour didn't work. So like Eagle bailed us out again. So then at that point, it's like, okay, like, they took us last minute at one point and now they took us last minute on a second point. Like, why don't we try and invest in this space? The biggest difficulty with White Eagle though, was we'd rent the ring every week and you had to carry the ring up and down the stairs and there's no place to really keep a box truck there. So that made things a little bit tougher. However, the idea was, come 2020, we're going to buy a wrestling ring. We're going to open up a wrestling school. We're going to do season 3 and season 4 of Uncharted Territory. in between those 2 seasons, we had a concept for an all women's weekly show that would have went about 10 weeks. So there would have never been a gap in programming, but the format would have changed. Because I always felt like with Uncharted Territory, the biggest problem that we encountered was we're building, we take time off. We come back, we're building, we take time off. If we were to run continuously, we can just continue to build. I mean, WrestleMania 2020, that was when it was still one night of WrestleMania. That was the first anybody was going to do a show that was during WrestleMania. We had a venue with 200 tickets to sell. I thought that's easy. That's a layup. Because if people are in town for indie shows and not WrestleMania, we'll be the only indie show. So we really had a lot of stuff planned for 2020, and figuring out some of the challenges related to season 2 of Uncharted Territory at White Eagle, it would have solved that problem. But we bought a wrestling ring, signed a contract to do American Run at the Palladium. The guy said, I'm not collecting a deposit from you because this ain't going to happen. And we didn't do too much for a pretty long period of time.
So that brings us into COVID. I have a whole section here for COVID. So how did you survive that stretch? Like, obviously, you guys were kind of, I don't know if I want to say peaking, but you guys were in a really good spot, obviously, coming off the second season of Uncharted, which ended at the tail end of 2019. You did that Beyond Championship Wrestling show, which was, you did a lot of 400 plus people at.
And plus the show at Six String at the end of January, where we had Statlander, Alex Reynolds, John Silver, and Orange Cassidy.
Please come back, right?
Which isn't even like that strong of a format in terms of like names. We had 450 tickets sold in a space that probably fits 300 comfortably. I remember having to delay the start of the second half of the show because so many people wanted to still sign with Statlander and Orange Cassidy because they were independent, but they were on AEW, and AEW was hot.
Right.
And basically being like, yo guys, please come to the back and we will have time to let you come back out and sign. And they must have stayed another hour after that show.
Yeah.
So we were hot. We were hot going into the pandemic, and we had all the programming set, and it all fell apart.
And I feel like you were benefiting a little bit from AEW at that point because you had their names that were on TV, but then they were still at your shows. And then obviously 2020 happened and they just started signing everybody.
So when you look at the first 2 seasons of Uncharted Territory and you see the success stories that came out of it, Bear Country didn't have a huge run in AEW, but that helped them get there. Layla Hirsch, kind of same thing, what got her on the radar. Christian Casanova, somebody that, was able to parlay that and to be able to go to WWE. Somebody like Thomas Santel had a really strong showing for us. But what I mean to say with all this is that there were people that we didn't even have. It wasn't like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we had a weekly show and then we could push XYZ. These are people that came out of the woodwork and made the most of the platform and parlayed it into getting contracts for periods of time. Somebody like Daniel Garcia. Again, you never take credit for the success of the individual wrestlers, but you can give them a platform where they can, hone their skill set and, build those connections. But then you see some of the other people, we were bringing in Trent Beretta, Chuck Taylor, LAX. Again, MJF had a strong run. Orange Cassidy, Statlander. And it's just it goes on and on and on, the list of names of people from season 1 and season 2 of Uncharted Territory that made their way to television. And it was easy for them to go to AEW because AEW figured out a way to run during the pandemic and we didn't. And
right.
AEW and WWE still needed to sign people and there was nothing that we could do. So it really bottlenecked kind of what we had talent-wise. And I mean, why did I run with GCW on the boardwalk? Because that was the day that was supposed to be American Rana, and my camera crew got booked out to their show. And I was just like, I just felt I was pissy. You know what I mean? Like, this sucks. Like, somebody else is going to run and we can't have American Rana. Like, no, why don't we see if we can run with them? And we did it. And the first one went well enough on 2 weeks' notice that we booked it again for August. And it went well enough that we said, let's try this in November. Well, by November, they weren't going to do it outside of the boardwalk. They were going to move it inside. And then, there was the second spike with COVID stuff, and we ended up backing out. We were supposed to run with them in November, and then in order to keep the tradition of doing New Year's Eve, we were going to run with them on New Year's Eve. And I just got, I had to follow my gut and stuff like that. And what happened was there was a COVID outbreak at shows, and that's when fans started losing faith in terms of the indoor shows. I had people hitting me up for refunds, and I could see the day that ticket sales started dropping off. And I waited about 5 or 6 days, and I'm like, this isn't going to work. And so we pulled out, and for better or for worse, we live with the decision. Obviously, it put us in a position where we couldn't create any more additional programming until we did like a batch taping in February. And by the time that footage rolled out, they started lifting restrictions in Massachusetts. And, April 2021, we got to do our first show back, which I actually had COVID at that time, so I didn't even get to be there, but it was Dickinson and Jerry that were running it. And the ring that we had acquired, we bought it in March 2020. We got it delivered in June 2020. It's the first time we ever set it up. It was screwed up, and we still ran with it. We didn't have any other choice. 100 people sitting distance, masked, at White Eagle. And again, that's where we look at all the different wrestling organizations and stuff like that. And just by virtue of us being in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts having some of the strictest, COVID restrictions, which I don't disagree with, I mean, COVID was pretty bad for everybody. I think a lot of people turned on me because I was pretty outspoken saying that anybody that has to work during the pandemic, like I don't judge what people are doing. I wasn't, as a small business owner, nobody was giving me any money to sit out.
Right. Especially early 2021, like most things were back functional at that point.
But for the people, for the wrestlers that continued through the pandemic and stuff like that, I never begrudged them. And I feel like that was kind of when, I started to tarnish my reputation online, because that was a very divisive issue. And I understand that now, but, I still felt strongly about it enough to, my dad is in his 60s. He's working at a supermarket. It's like, is he an essential worker? Like, is my dad going to get COVID and fucking die? Like, I'm supposed to be operating my food truck. They've suspended permitting for my food truck because they're going to say that my truck's going to be so popular that people are going to gather in unruly crowds, and it's going to be like a super spreader event. There was just so much, looking back on it, like the whole thing was just so stupid, but it's because we lived. So we have the hindsight.
Right.
To look back on. There's, however many other people, 300,000 people or whatever in the United States alone that died, that can't. So, I'm grateful to still be here. But 2021, limited capacity. Okay, cool. Let's open for American Rana. We got hit with the hurricane. We had to issue $20,000 in ticket refunds. It was a last minute cancellation. Cardona was not happy about it. But there's no way that we would have had enough people to be able to run. And that's when it's like, oh man, like we're really in trouble. And if IWTV hadn't been like, yep, we're going to guarantee funding for season 3 of Uncharted Territory, I don't know that like we would have even continued realistically. I think that could have been like, okay, everybody got hit with the pandemic, but not everybody got hit with a hurricane for their version of WrestleMania to have to issue all these refunds. Like you can't just keep losing money repeatedly for months and months.
Especially when it's like a 6-month bill to a show, then you can't do. Now, so then season 3 came back end of 2021.
Yeah,
I know your main event of that first show was like Alex Shelley and Garcia. Was that kind of when you kind of quickly realized, hey, this format might be dead, it's time to do something else?
Yeah, by week 3, we had Davey Richards and Matt McCoskey. I think we had like 75 tickets out. And I was just like, why am I taking like more than a fifth of the budget and giving it to this guy that hasn't done anything to promote? Like, Davey Richards worked his ass off. I'm not going to lie about that, but it's like, he didn't draw anybody.
Yeah.
Why is he getting all this money? And around that time, I had guys like Kyle King, Dustin Waller, Love Doug showing up. And I was just like, if I throw these guys on the Uncharted format, they're not going to get over. It's going to be a disservice to them. But they're coming and setting up. They just want an opportunity. What if we do a show, everybody gets paid off the gate, because right now they're getting no money. So even if they get $15, $20, they're still coming out anyway. They'll get a chance to perform. And we can run continuously, so we don't have to take that break off where we lose our crowd after every season of Uncharted Territory. And we can do a show for rookies, and at least in the meantime, have programming to figure out what the next step is. And little did I know that it was going to take off so quickly to such a strong level, and that so many people that weren't rookies would want to be involved just because of, each person has their own individual reasons as to why they want to contribute to Wrestling Open. Some want to stay sharp, some want to try new material, some just believe in what we've done for them in the past and want to give back. Some just want that extra date, and to make the extra $40 or whatever it might end up being might be worth it for them. But there was a lot of different factors that went into, why is Uncharted not working anymore? What can we do to make this work? And all of it went to become what Wrestling Open started as. And again, Wrestling Open quickly transformed into something way bigger than what anybody had originally imagined, because it was supposed to kind of be like exhibition cards. And the Wrestling Open officials kind of took the lead on that as far as like really crafting some good rivalries and stories, which helped the wrestlers connect with the fans even quicker than what we had anticipated, which then in turn helped us sell more tickets for bigger crowds. But yeah, man, that season 3 of Uncharted Territory, like we had some good talent like Masha and Makowski, Megan Bain, Willow. I think that charging the $20 tickets, like, it was good to know, but I think it took us out of the sweet spot. I feel like $10 tickets at the door is the sweet spot. It's just
I think people had wrestling fatigue at that point too, because they were stuck at home. It was the only live wrestling that there was WWE and AEW. Only live sporting event, I should say, for quite a while. And then the NBA came back at the end of 2020, but it wasn't the same without the fans. Same with hockey, baseball, things of that nature. So wrestling was the only one that, even though they didn't have fans, they were able to kind of manufacture fans by putting their the Thunderdome or whatever they ended up doing. So I think by the time you came back, and this is just my personal opinion, I think by the time you came back, it was like, well, they're running shows on Thursdays. I've watched wrestling 4 times this week already. It's not as important to me, and I'm safe at home, right? I think people still had that COVID stretch set. Wrestling Open started January 2022. I think something that might have worked in your favor was during the Restival, which, for you guys listening to this that don't know for sure, Drew would run a Restival around his Heavy Lies the Crown show on New Year's Eve, where it'd be multiple like area promotions and whatnot that would run their own shows. Somebody bailed, I think.
It was Blitzkrieg. Larry and Skylar both got COVID.
Yeah, so then you had to do like a soft opening of Wrestling Open. I feel like that people were kind of curious what it was, and they weren't sure what it was. I feel like that put eyes on it and kind of, maybe this is going to be a cool concept. And I kind of had more people getting into it. Do you kind of agree with that assessment?
Yeah, and what's funny about the Thursday night burnout and stuff like that is when you have Raw, NXT, Dynamite, SmackDown, Thursday is the night that it's like before we own that space. Like, even when we go back to the FET days, nobody would run wrestling shows on Sunday afternoons, except sometimes PWG when they would do their 3-day tournament, so once or twice a year. We own Sundays. I remember one time being bullshit because we had this huge show, and then it came out that like Dixie Carter had like brought back Vince Russo, and like the emails had gotten leaked to Spike TV. And I was like, we usually own this space on a Sunday night. All people are talking about are the results of our show. And now they're talking about stupid TNA. I was so pissed about that. And I think Thursdays became like the go-to spot for like, oh, if it's not WWE or AEW, then it's going to be on a Thursday night. And it got to be a very competitive space. The fatigue was a real factor. But I also think that one of the reasons that Wrestling Open worked as opposed to the Uncharted Territory format is, even though we're streaming on IWTV, obviously IWTV Beyond Wrestling, one entity, and I want IWTV to do well with viewerships and subscribers and stuff like that. I think that part of the format change too was, what can we do to improve the experience for the live crowd? And that's the first time that we've ever done any sort of programming where I was not the sole person in charge of making creative decisions. So I switched my focus on the fan experience front of house. What can we do to make sure that the people in the room are having a good time? What can we do to keep them coming back? More of a focus on the experience and the marketing side of things.
Right. And I feel like you had to find a place to get new fans. And I think Wrestling Open did that. I think the price point, kind of that party atmosphere that was built by people that might have never watched wrestling before, but there was a big time word of mouth factor that kind of came through the city at that point. People would bring a friend, and they would bring a friend, and the next thing you know, you're popping, 250 pretty consistently. You're 168 episodes in now, which is crazy to think about. And that's all been strictly here in Worcester. What led you to start to expand this idea out to a second show on Monday nights in Rhode Island?
I can't believe that in the 3 years that we've been doing it, that nobody's tried to copy our concept, because everybody copies everything in wrestling. I think that the Wrestling Open idea can be scaled to any city in the country on any given night. And I think what's most intriguing about this is we have Thursday nights going in Worcester. Rhode Island's close. It's only 50 minutes away. So if Rhode Island works, now we have proof of concept that like it can work on either night of the week. It can work if they're in close proximity to one another. It can work if one's sitting and one's standing. It can work if one's 21 plus and the other's family friendly. To be able to then go say, hey, we can do this in a place like Austin, Texas, or Nashville, Tennessee, or Chicago, Illinois, or Los Angeles, California. My goal, my legacy, when I really sat and thought about what is it that I want to do in professional wrestling, I'm going to be 40 this year, which like it's old and it's not old at the same time. But at some point you start kind of losing grasp on what it is that the fans want, and you have to kind of install other people that are more in tune with what it is that the fans want to see in terms of creative output. And I'm much more fascinated with the business side of things. And I really think that I just love independent wrestling. Would I ever go to TV? I don't think that I would sign up for it. But if somebody reached out to me and I had more of an opportunity to negotiate, the money was right. I mean, look, man, I run the food truck as a family business. It's like if you were to tell me right now, okay, break your lease and go fucking live in Florida, like I don't, the amount of money that they would have to pay me to do that, I don't think is realistic. And that's not like bragging or anything about that. It's just when you have to try and evaluate what's important in your life. And, I don't know anybody that's getting like, I don't know, $250,000, $300,000 a year to be like, a grunt to get their foot in the door over there. And I don't know how it would work in a team environment. So I really want to focus on independent wrestling. And I think that the New England scene is very healthy right now because of the format of Wrestling Open. You have seen other companies literally pop up that realistically have no business even running shows, but they can credibly fill out their cards because of some of the wrestlers that have come through Wrestling Open that are looking for dates. And I think if we can find other parts of the country where there's a couple training facilities, but not as much exposure for the wrestler, we can scale Wrestling Open. That's why I want to do both Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Obviously, we've got a great opportunity with roads on the Patuxent, which I'll touch on a little bit more. But I think that the WWID program and the fact that 7 of the 20 or so wrestlers are like regulars at Wrestling Open, and the idea of Wrestling Open being, let's take all of these rookies and throw them in this highly structured environment and, get feedback from people in WWE and feedback from people in AEW and try and incorporate that into our formats. It's a complete 180 from what Beyond Wrestling first was, right? When we were talking about it, like, oh, how did Beyond Wrestling start? Oh, it was wrestling for wrestlers, complete freedom. But because of that bottlenecking of the lack of resources, there's no passing of the torch. There's nobody that's sitting in the locker rooms that's a veteran that can tell these guys the right way to do it. So right now we're very much in a period of independent wrestling where it's the blind leading the blind, and the guys have to kind of come up together. Nobody can wrestle anybody that's any better. Everybody has to wrestle somebody that's pretty much at the same level. So where they get the advantages, they get the guidance of the shows being formatted from television. And I think that's why you see the Bryce Donovans who, Bryce has been wrestling for a while, but he stopped teaming with Bobby, and obviously not a knock on Bobby. Bobby's an amazing performer, but Bryce started doing this new thing. Immediately, he's got the eyes of WWE officials. Ricky Smoke's been wrestling for a while. Brad Baylor came out of nowhere, but putting them together as a team is swipe right. I didn't do that. The Wrestling Open officials put that together because I'm not involved in the creative process. Now that goes to WWE TV, and that's their act. Working with Zay Steele a bunch before she went to Marigold, working with Marcus Mathers a bunch, working with Gall a bunch just by virtue of him being in New England. And obviously Aaron Rourke, who's been in the mix going back to the initial run of Uncharted Territory, who MJF endorsed and was like, you'd be a fool not to use this guy. I think that lends credibility to the success of the program. And that is another reason why I feel like it's important to try and pursue a second weekly show with the Wrestling Open format, because on any given week, we are turning away, I would wager to guess, 30 to 50 wrestlers that there's not spots for on Wrestling Open on Thursday nights in Worcester.
So speaking of that WWID concept, it's a hot topic item. Last couple of weeks has been a lot. I think they're trying to get...
Yeah, because people are just lying online.
Right, and they're trying to get more people involved promotion-wise. They just announced a couple of shows with GCW and FSW, I think it is, in Vegas for WrestleMania weekend, where they're going to start crowning their first champion, which... it's kind of counterintuitive with the Evolve stuff they're doing at the same time. It's almost like they'll have too many people vying for different titles. But it's probably safe to say you've been the promotion that's had the most integration with them so far. that isn't one of them that's tied directly into one of the schools that they're kind of promoting at the point. Do you think that this WWE ID concept is good for the indies long term?
It's gonna depend how it goes. But like, let's say right now, like all 20 guys and girls just got like signed in one fell swoop. People make it seem like, oh my God, it's like all these heavy hitters that are like the tent poles of the independent wrestling industry. If they're all gone, like the scene's going to collapse. Look, I think that the wrestlers that we work with are super talented, but we also have wrestlers like Brad Hollister and Fancy Ryan Clancy and Ichiban and Bobby Orlando and Desmond Cole and Channing Thomas, and the list goes on and on and on. That's just on the men's side of things, that if all 20 of these people were gone all at once, I don't think it's going to even put a dent in our armor. It's not like it was when we were literally like, oh my God, I can't believe they're signing Biff. I can't believe they're signing Gulak. I can't believe they're signing Kim. I can't believe they're signing Dijak. We've changed our format, and WWIT is going after people that are legit prospects for WWE's programming, not indie darlings. So in a worst case scenario, I don't think it's going to do anything to hurt the indies. In a best case scenario, they sign some of these people, they go to TV, they do really well, more resources get put into the program, more thought, more structure, and they see the organizations that are working to help the wrestlers reach their goals quicker, and isn't that always the hope? That's the carrot that gets dangled. Man, if we can help find them their next generation talent, maybe we can get XYZ in return. But you do on some level, though, you do it altruistically, where it's like, I run wrestling shows. I don't get rich doing it, but it is really cool when we put somebody in the ring and they have that, career trajectory altering match or moment. Keith Lee having, he's not doing anything right now, but he had 3 WWE tryouts and nothing happened. And then he had that match against Dijak. And, within a couple of years, he finally made it to WWE. He said it himself in his documentary. That doesn't happen beyond wrestling. Now, once you get there, I can't help you. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I don't see how WWID could hurt, the indies. I do think that with ID and then, Evolve coming together kind of last minute, that's up to WWE to sort kind of how the two are going to work, either, complementary or if there's going to be any synergy or if one feeds the other. But that's kind of out of my hands. So I don't really focus on that too much.
Gotcha. Now, the Beyond Institute of Pro Wrestling, I know you were talking about how, heading into the pandemic, you were thinking about getting the school rolling and all that fun stuff. And Bio Pro is getting it done for you now with that. How did this come to fruition? Like, I know, was it like something straight out of the pandemic? You're like, well, let's get this thing rolling. You've got the spot with the Eagle, we can get it started. But what put this all together, and how's it working out for you?
We were supposed to start at the school with Dickinson initially, and then the pandemic happened, and he started getting busy with like New Japan, and while he was still actively wrestling and stuff like that, and it was kind of like, well, he's not going to be able to commit to it now, and that's fine. And then actually, Ken Doan contacted me and was like, I was thinking about doing a school, but I don't want to do a school if you're going to do a school, because there's not going to be enough students in the area. Schools are, I don't want to say schools are less about who the trainers are and more so about location, but like, you've got New England Wrestling Academy in North Andover, you have like the Lockup in Fall River, but there's not really much in Worcester area. So, we worked with Kenny and, with his WWE schedule and stuff like that, it just, if it wasn't for Kenny starting the school, I had, between not being able to have access to Dickinson and between having the agreement with Kenny, I had reached out to Santel and he wouldn't commit to it. And I think that once Kenny was in the mix, that was when Santel was like, okay, I'm going to prioritize this. And then, even though obviously, Kenny didn't stay with the program long term, at that point, Santel was just like, oh no, like this is a lot, more professional in terms of the structure, the setup, the amount of students that we had and stuff like that. And so he was all in. And Malonis was somebody else that I really wanted to work with because I knew that he had, trained people at Nepwa and stuff like that. So when Kenny was no longer part of the program and Brian was available, it was kind of like a no-brainer. Doing the school at White Eagle made certain things easier logistically, because like we could set up Tuesday, leave it up Wednesday, leave it up Thursday, and then we'd just break down Thursday night, and everything would stay in one place. We moved to Schoolyard in West Boylston, and the energy is completely different because you got like a pickleball court on one side, a pickleball court on one side, you have a volleyball court on the other, and there's kind of like unused space on the side that we can occupy for wrestling training. And even though it's not like world-class athletes like in there, nobody's like lifting weights and stuff like that. There's an energy about it that wasn't there when we had the bar to ourselves at White Eagle. And we've actually expanded our programming. We've got a lot more. We've probably had 10 or more student signups since we moved over to Schoolyard.
Yeah, I mean, Schoolyard, definitely cool setup. Definitely
Schoolyard's awesome. We did the first Bio Pro Bowl there a couple weeks ago. Huge crowd for what a student show is, with just good energy and the type of place where it's like, oh, maybe we can do more shows there in the future. But having to move out of White Eagle because of the renovations, it's like I don't know. Is it a blessing in disguise? You have to, whatever hand you're dealt, you have to play. It's how it is. There's no folding and waiting till it comes back around. You got to operate a business like you're all in on every hand, I think. Or maybe not all in on every hand, but you got to play every hand and then try and make the best of it. So yeah, we can't do shows at White Eagle for the time being. We've got Bio Pro at the Schoolyard. We've got Wrestling Open at Electric Haze, and it's helping us reach even more people than when we were just at White Eagle.
Cool. So gonna kind of go off topic a little bit here. Gonna go talk about WrestleMania's around the corner, right? Independent wrestling became a staple of WrestleMania weekends. Probably, I mean, ROH did it for a while, and that kind of bled into some other stuff. Probably around, what would you say? Maybe New Orleans is where it really built, like took off.
It was big there, because when it was in Texas the year before, like it was tough getting around and stuff like that. But I mean, even that first WrestleCon, it would have been in 2014 or 2015 when it was High Spots working with organizing it and doing the convention on one side of the room in Secaucus, and then all the shows.
2013, yeah, that was the first one I went to. Yeah, with Chikara was there and Evolve.
But everybody got too big for their britches, right? Everybody split up. Like you had everything under one roof, and it was the only game in town. And then even the following year, like it split into different things.
So seeing the good, like obviously 2018, the live show might not have been, a huge moneymaker for you, but you did a lot of YouTube stuff that took off with that ESPN article, a lot of cool stuff. That was kind of the good and the bad of it all wrapped into one. What are your thoughts on the indie aspect of WrestleMania now? Do you think it's still something that's a good idea for people? I know you haven't done it since 2021. I know you weren't even down there for that, but what kind of made you pull out of that concept? And do you think it's something that's still profitable for people moving forward?
It's just oversaturation of it, It's just too much. And I don't see any of these cards coming together where it's like, oh my God, like it was, because you don't have the players. There's more promotions than there are wrestlers to fill out their rosters. That goes across the board. That's WWE, AEW, and everything else in between. I don't see it as something that it's like, this is something special that we have to wait once a year for anymore.
Plus, it doesn't help that WWE is now 2 nights. That comes with
2 nights. WWE is like 10 nights.
Yeah. Well, just WrestleMania is 2 nights, and you get SmackDown on Friday. Got the Hall of Fame after it. You've got them, sticking around to do NXT the Tuesday after with Raw. So, I mean, in reality, they're running a live wrestling show.
Dude, no offense. Would you rather see, is there a guy for Dragon Gate? Is his name Ben K? Did I make that up?
It sounds familiar, yeah.
Who do you want?
I don't think that's right.
Would you rather see Ben K wrestle, or would you rather go see Tony Hinchcliffe, or whatever the hell that guy's name is, do the roast of WWE?
That you can't even watch on TV. Yeah, no, it's a no-brainer.
There's no shortage of programming WWE sees what's up. They want it all, and they have their hands in the indies too, right? They've got wrestlers that are going to be doing wrestling, like WrestleMania week shows there and stuff like that. So it's really tough to compete with WWE. Back when it was just WrestleMania and everybody could kind of piggyback on, it was like, the Humpback Whale and the Barnacle still stood a chance. Obviously there are still players that figure out a way to make it work, but we were always kind of on the fringe. So with the right partners, we could make it work. Without the right partners, I think it's tough. And, God bless some of these other promotions that still think that PWG is ruling the roost, because without them having adapted and changing their format and stuff like that, I can't imagine going out to a WrestleMania weekend and doing anything other than blowing a ton of money.
Right. I mean, I feel like there might be something to a table at a WrestleCon or something, but as a promotion, what does that even do for you? Even the WrestleCon Super Shows kind of struggling to sell tickets as a part of the collective now, you know?
It's a lot. There's a lot of wrestling out there. I still think there's more shows and more promotions than there are like legit stars that are going to bring fans in. But
right,
that's how capitalism works, right? You do what you want to do, and then if it makes money, you get to do it again. And if it doesn't, then you don't.
I guess the one thing that they have going for them this year is that it's Vegas. So,
yep.
You know, all of the live stuff, you know, East Coast time for us is what, 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock. So out there, well, for them, it's 4 or 5 o'clock. So after those events, they can still have indie shows to bounce off of. And there's probably a lot of people in Vegas that aren't paying for that WrestleMania price tag that might have some time on their hands. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, the excitement level, I feel, is not where it was because WWE is kind of owning everything that's going on in Vegas. You know,
what do you think's the top match announced right now across the board for all independent WrestleMania weekend shows? Like,
honestly, I feel like the only thing that's getting anything really announced for it's Spring Break.
Mm-hmm. Think how crazy that is. WrestleMania is less than a month away, right?
Right. It's like
a lot of these other shows don't even have like stuff announced.
Right.
How are you going to expect to sell a show for people that like have to have like travel arrangements and shit?
Right, and I feel like Janela is really the only one that's even doing the heavy lifting on the internet with that too. You know,
I would say what match would I be most likely that I want to see would probably be Minoru Suzuki and Matt Tremont.
Yeah. Because a couple of them, like he just announced like a scramble that's all 55-year-olds and higher. Like I think I would probably that's what I would be into, but I'm a sicko. Now, current day wrestling, like obviously not WWE related. I mean, not Beyond related. Do you still stay up on it? Do you watch cable wrestling as often as you can? Is there stuff that you make sure you go out of your way to see? How does it look for you?
Yeah, and I'm starting to not. You know, I'm starting to. There's only so many tropes. There's only so many stories, and when it bleeds together, it makes you kind of resent all of it. So, you know, tonight. You know, obviously, I'm sorry that I know this is, you know, not evergreen now, but like tonight's like the last Monday where I could have my buddies from high school over to watch Raw together before we start doing Wrestling Open Rhode Island. So we all got together for it, and it's just like everybody left, and we're just like, thank God we have Wrestling Open RI so that we can do something different next week. When you've been watching wrestling for 35 years, you just sit and scrutinize it and you agonize over it, and it doesn't get you more excited to watch more wrestling. So I try and watch as much as I can because there were periods of time where I felt like that would influence my decision-making and it would lead to us trying to create unique experiences, something that was going to be better for the fans. And I think that the more programming that we create on our own, the less concerned I am with other organizations and what they're doing and stepping on their material and more focused on, no, let's just worry about our own things and our own audience. And let's try and cultivate a crowd that is, specific to a certain location as opposed to going after people that are already wrestling fans. And by virtue of doing that, we can be less concerned with like stepping on somebody, you know, like we had Mark Sterling doing the Polish Eagle gimmick, you know, and then it's like, well, now there's Mr. American Rana. No, what the hell's Chad Gable called? American Grande or whatever.
Yeah,
whatever the hell it is, you know, the Gulf of America shit.
Something to sell a mask, right?
Yeah. You know, so whatever it's doing, and it's like, you know, we could still do our stuff in our world for our fans, and nobody's gonna be like, oh, they're ripping it off. It's derivative drivel. You know what I mean? It's like, no, let's worry about our fans and what they like, and not focus on it. So there was a period of time where I used to watch everything because it was like, we have to be different, we have to be innovative, we can't have, you know, material that runs over. And now, I don't know, I'm looking forward to watching it less and less. Like
it's impossible to watch it all now. Like WWE alone, if you isolate SmackDown, Raw, and NXT, most weeks you're looking at 7.5 hours of programming. And that doesn't even take the Revolve in, which I'm sure is something you're trying to check out.
I've watched all 3 episodes of that. You know, I try and keep up with NXT a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, I've stopped watching SmackDown altogether, and if I'm around, I'll watch Raw. And if I'm not, I'm not getting caught up on it. You know, I stopped watching AEW altogether. I haven't watched TNA in years. Every now and then, just if the schedule lines up, I'll watch MLW for shits and giggles. Very rarely do I watch any other independent wrestling besides either the shows. I don't even watch my own shows, okay? Let's be realistic. I listen to them. I get a vibe for the room, but I'm more focused on watching the fans than I am watching the wrestling. That's what I have other people installed in that role to do it. But there are times where I will go to other independent wrestling shows when it's not food truck season. but it's, maybe I did 4 or 5 this year. So
Right.
I'm not really watching too much wrestling these days, but I'm producing so much
Right.
that I can just by virtue of being at the school on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I'd never be able to watch NXT or Dynamite live. Well, if I have to do other work to make our shows happen, sometimes it's on in the background, but I'd rather have Chopped or, Guys Grocery Games on in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is a good time to ask these back-to-back loaded questions, I think. If you could change one part of current WWE, what would it be?
They have completely gotten away from quality control when it comes to the wrestling itself. And it's like, yeah, I understand that like they're hot right now and they're selling out arenas and like, the stars themselves feel important and have star power, but like I know talking from people in WWE that like they're like, oh my God, we've gotten so far away from like, the in-ring stuff, like that they're having like, a renewed focus on I feel like I shouldn't be saying this, but like they're having a renewed focus on like the proficiency of like the in-ring skill. So, it's not just me that's aware of it, but being in the business and watching the shows and stuff like that and scrutinizing it, it's like, oh my God, like how could, this is supposed to be the best of the best, like clean it up. And I feel like there's been a lack of quality control when it comes to actual wrestling itself. So I would like to see that improved.
Now, same question for AEW. If you could change one thing about them. I know you're not watching as much, but what would you change?
I think that they need a completely different person installed with creative. I think that one person can't. Maybe one person could do that if that's all that they were doing. But if to run the entire company and have to like hash out creative and stuff like that, I mean, I don't know how you do it. Maybe you do a draft and you split up your roster, and maybe it's not so much the creative issue as much as it is there's so many people that are under contract that there's this need to try and satisfy everybody that's there. So the booking then suffers by trying to get everybody meaningful roles, because when everybody's on, it's like nobody's meaningful. And they have some legit heavy hitters on their roster. I mean, I don't know how, with Shane Strickland and Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega and Ricochet and, Speedball in the mix. You really could promote something that is like a wholly unique style of professional wrestling, unlike anything that's been done before. But you have to figure out how to make it mainstream instead of just like, oh, it's an indie wrestling show that we took to TV. Yeah. It felt like it was a lot more focused when Cody was in the mix. And, I don't have any intel whatsoever. It's just the way that the two timelines, align in my mind, where it's like, when did I, feel like AEW lost focus when Cody went to WWE? So could purely be a coincidence. But I think that at one point there was a very strong creative focus that was taking people that were not necessarily lousy wrestlers, but like they weren't in the league of like even like a Kyle Fletcher now. And those people were interesting as performers. And now it's like, wow, you have some of the best athletes that have ever existed in wrestling. How come I'm not excited to watch the show?
Right. I think all of us kind of underestimated Cody's star power when he was there, right? Maybe it's because he wasn't on top there. Maybe he wasn't who they were centering everything around. But, I mean, ratings went down when he left. And then look at how instantaneously he was at the top of WWE. I think it's kind of crazy, the trajectory that man in particular took on with both companies.
And like when they introduced Collision, right? Didn't it feel like somebody else was running it? And there was like a strong like 8 or 9 week run, and then Punk was out of the mix, and it kind of became like the other show. So again, I don't know anything definitively, but putting 2 and 2 together, it seems like there's some sort of a link there.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, as a whole, we alluded to it earlier. Wrestling's as hot as ever. I feel WWE especially. Arenas are packed. There's merchandise sales are through the roof. Fanatics deal is crazy. Have you noticed that the WWE boom helped you with Wrestling Open? It helped you with Beyond in general? Or do you think that like maybe these people that are lapsed fans are like, well, there's wrestling in my town, I'm not going to go pay WWE. I'm going to go to this instead. Do you think that that's played a factor at all, or is it not related at all?
Historically, yes, but for this most recent run, no. Because, again, we came up with the different ideas and tools to be able to facilitate, like, word-of-mouth advertising. And so we'll get a lot of people that probably, they could recognize Hulk Hogan. They've heard the name Stone Cold Steve Austin. They might not know who Roman Reigns is, but they'll come to cheer CPA because their friends told them it's $10 to come drink and they're going to have fun.
Right.
The mentality shift was, there were 850,000 people watching Dynamite every week. Rather than targeting them, why don't we target the 850,000 people that live within driving distance to Worcester? And that was that can sum up the biggest fundamental shift in terms of what our programming is designed to do as we head into 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, Wrestling Open, like obviously you're heading into a second weekly show. If someone was watching this and are listening to this and you had a match between two wrestlers to look up, like, I know you're not watching every week, but just like the two guys that you think might best exemplify the product, who would that be?
You got to watch the match with Brad Hollister and Ichiban when we crowned the first Wrestling Open champion. Even though that footage is a little bit dated now, that's the spirit of Wrestling Open, where it's like we didn't have any like quote unquote names on the show, but it was a really high stakes match that, over a period of time, like the fans understood the importance of. It was two of our best performers that are still freelance independent wrestlers that are still active, that are probably even better now than they were even a couple years ago, since they continue to hone their craft. And I think that sums up in a nutshell, what the power of Wrestling Open is. We did over 500 fans at the Worcester Palladium for Steel Cage Warfare this past year, which is more than would have been capacity at White Eagle had we been able to continue to run there anyway. And that's based on, the stories that were put together without having like any quote unquote name. And I don't know very many places that are doing that. Of course, there's always going to be spots that do well. But to go from, oh my God, we're spending, $10,000 every show flying in, 8 to 12 different wrestlers to fill out the cards to try and give the rub to the locals. The rub doesn't come from more popular wrestlers anymore. The rub comes from the investment from the fans into the stories that we're telling, to bond with a lot of wrestlers that are all on an equal playing field. And then when the wrestlers build that special connection, that's how they get the rub now. So
that makes sense.
It's different. It's just different. If the pandemic never happened, if AEW didn't happen, there's so many what ifs, but I just don't see independent wrestling ever going back to what it was. And, another thing that we overlook is like, man, the match quality is the standard for the match quality and the professional presentation, the athleticism is so high across the board. It's not like it was in 2009, 2008, when the ideas of Beyond Wrestling were first starting, where it's like, you look at some of those CZW cards and you had guys in like, tearaway pants and t-shirts and stuff like that. And, it's so much more professional. And as a result, it's become a little bit more homogenized too. One of the things that's cool about independent wrestling, though, that hasn't been brought up is just like there's still such a strong following for deathmatch wrestling. And I don't think that any company is ever going to go full bore. I mean, obviously we saw, Moxley with the nails sticking out of his back and stuff like that, which is pretty gnarly for any type of match. But that's not going to be an every week type of thing. There's deathmatch shows every week that are, commanding a very strong viewing audience. And maybe it's just because it's like a real life snuff film, but I think that that's something that's worth noting, that like deathmatch wrestling continues to be like a driving force in independent wrestling that doesn't get nearly enough credit. Now, with that said, our second branch of Wrestling Open RI, you will not see any of that.
Yeah.
That will be a family friendly show, like to the point where like, I don't want fans in the crowd swearing because I want to take the show to television. So like, if somebody's swearing and I have to like get up and like make them leave, like I will do that. We've done cool. We've done community. We've done adult oriented. I really want to focus on trying to get a weekly family show off the ground, attract more sponsors, create that level of stability, honor the venue that we're in, a venue that's been around since 1915. I don't want people coming in and chanting asshole and, fuck them up and all this other stuff. Like there's a time and a place for it. It's not going to be Monday nights in Rhode Island.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the deathmatch thing, whether it's just a niche product or what, it's different than what they see on TV. And, I look back at some of your cards going into like 2016, 2017, and they're like Zack Sabre gems in the middle of it. I feel like there's so many things that fly under the radar on indie shows sometimes, and that people see that same match on TV now and they like, cream their pants over it. It's crazy how it all kind of goes full circle. Now
we had access to so many different wrestlers with so many different skill sets that we used to be able to focus on doing a super show that was more of a variety show, and enough new people came up that you could have almost a similar format. Oh, this is going to be the comedy match on the show. This is going to be the high octane match. This is going to be the technical match. It's going to be the hardcore match. And you kind of always have the same format, but plug in different people in those roles because more people would move on, more people would come up. It's just not like that now. Again, it goes back to kind of like how homogenized everything is. But the stories at Wrestling Open, and especially for how inexperienced the talent is, the quality of the shows that we're able to get out of what limited resources we have is it impresses me. And I'm kind of surprised that more people don't pay attention to it. And that's a shortcoming, for me as a promoter. And it's something that, hopefully we'll be able to look to resolve. But again, we really do well on a local level, but it's trying to, which way does the pendulum swing? Are we more concerned about the national fans or are we more concerned about the local fans? Right now it's the local fans, but we'd love to be able to have our cake and eat it too, where, wow, look at this great thing that they're doing with their local fans, but people might want to sit home on a Thursday or Monday and watch it as an alternative and have an appreciation as well.
Absolutely. So put you on the spot here. What wrestler, if you had to pick one, has been your best Beyond Wrestling success story? And you can answer that any way that you want. Whether it's somebody that you might not have seen was going to then eventually become a TV star, or you just kind of saw them organically grow over time and they became awesome. Well, what do you think?
Keith seems like an obvious choice. He's not active right now. The first time that it ever felt like, wow, we're really onto something here was when Biff and Gulak got booked for PWG. Because they were both active in other organizations, but it was pretty clear that their work in Beyond, where they were teaming and they weren't teaming in other places, was what got them on PWG's radar. And that was a last stop before going to WWE. Orange Cassidy is probably, now, of course, Orange had been wrestling for years before he had come to Beyond Wrestling, but he was doing it, with a different persona. And, he was told, in other places like Orange Cassidy is never going to work. But letting him do his thing, and it's like, I don't need to understand it. I enjoy it. Let him be the one that understands it and have him be in charge of what he's doing for the creative process. Like, it doesn't need to be Orange Cassidy through Drew Cordeiro's lens. It can just be Orange Cassidy. When it gets to TV, maybe it doesn't. But I feel like as far as like when you look at like Dijak and Keith and Kim and, the dozens of other wrestlers that went to TV over the years that had a longer run with Beyond Wrestling, I feel like Orange Cassidy has probably accomplished the most. And I guess maybe if Megan Bain gets strapped up, maybe she could supersede, but she's still very early into her run. So there's no, I think that she's super talented, but who knows what kind of staying power that she's going to have, just because it seems like, people get cycled in and out very quickly.
On their women's division, especially. Yeah. I hear you there.
That's a polite way to put it.
Yeah, I agree with the Orange Cassidy thing because I feel like, he was doing a lot of stuff in other places too, but I feel like he had some matches with you in Uncharted Territory that kind of showed he was a serious wrestler too, where a lot of other places weren't showcasing that,
I mean, Santana and Ortiz, you know what I mean? Like would they have gone to AEW had it not been for TNA? Probably not. But those guys were somebody that were like really, really, really new when they first started doing even Beyond Wrestling. So to be able to continue to work on them, it's sick that we've got Ortiz back for the show on Saturday. So
yeah. So speaking of your show this Saturday, so we'll kind of be wrapping up here. So we talked about Wrestling Open coming next Monday into Rhode Island. Now you got a show in Foxborough this Saturday. So tell us a little bit about
that. Prince of the Rodeo, like the Turbo Negro song, because we're at Six String, which is like kind of like a Western themed bar. I'm doing something a little bit different for the show. I just wanted to announce a few of the top matches, and I think there's going to be some fun surprises for the fans as well. It's going to be Ortiz versus TJ Crawford, which is like an awesome first-time ever match. I think that TJ, everybody else that I've mentioned from Wrestling Open, I'm an idiot that I'm only mentioning TJ Crawford for the first time, especially because he's one of our trainers at BioPro. He's so ingrained in my mind as like being like one of the best that like I just assume everybody else knows that. But him versus Ortiz is going to be awesome. We have Sean Legacy, who's a high flyer from the WWID program, is going to be going up against Gabriel Sky, who's been in the mix with us since the first season of Uncharted Territory. Kind of an intriguing match. The IWTV champion Marcus Mathers teaming with the Wrestling Open champion Fancy Ryan Clancy against the Wrestling Open Tag Team champions in Swipe Right. And that's just 2 days before Clancy defends the Wrestling Open title against Brad Baylor from Swipe Right. And then Dijak is currently advertised to go one-on-one with Bryce Donovan. And, we've got some other awesome wrestlers on the card. Aaron Rourke, Bobby Orlando, Love Doug, Brad Hollister, Spike, Nishimura, Gabby Forza, Channing Thomas, DJ Power. So it's going to be a strong card. It's always interesting to compare and contrast. Like, yeah, when we were there back in January of 2020 and we had 450 people, and then it's like, man, maybe I'd be happy with 150 people for a show at a 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. So we'll take the opportunities as they come. I can't picture there being a strong focus on Beyond Wrestling Super shows while we're trying to figure out the logistics of keeping Wrestling Open and Wrestling Open RI not just afloat but also flourishing. But I know that we'll be back at Ralph's Rock Diner this year. I've got a meeting for a heavy hitter venue in Boston area on Friday that hopefully comes to fruition. And I think we'll do American Rana. I don't know why we wouldn't. I'd love to get back to Palladium at some point this year, even if it's just for Steel Cage Warfare for Wrestling Open. There's a lot of big stuff down the pipeline, but first and foremost is we're going to be running more independent wrestling dates this year than any other independent wrestling company, probably more than like 3 or 4 companies worldwide. I just want to make sure that we have the proper resources to do so. We have 3 professional wrestling rings in the mix right now. I know it sounds so stupid to be excited about that, but we have 1 for training, we have 1 for Wrestling Open in Worcester, and we have 1 for Wrestling Open in Rhode Island. And it's just like, long gone are the days of having to hit up Steve Ricard and be like, oh man, I got to come to your house and get the box truck and drive it over and try not to crash it and all the other, headaches that we used to go through logistically, where it's like, man, the fans that have supported us for the years have really helped us get to a point to find what feels like stability. You never know. It could all go away tomorrow. I'm so appreciative of everything we've done. Everything since the pandemic has been gravy, but let's see how much bigger we can take this. And I really think that Wrestling Open could be franchised, could be expanded across country. And that's when I'm looking to the next 5 or 10 years. Those are the thoughts in the back of my mind that help me make the decisions as far as what we want to do going forward.
Cool. So the Wrestling Open on Mondays in Rhode Island, is that going to be all on IWTV Live too? To
start, yeah. I want to take it to TV eventually, but I have to figure out what that even looks like, what our format's going to be, time slots, price tags, sponsorships. There's a lot going in there. So we'll be on IWTV, 6:45 spotlight match, 7 o'clock. The first match officially goes on for Mondays, and then Thursdays it's 7:30 spotlight match, 7:45 the first official match for Wrestling Open in Worcester. And, the Beyond Super shows and everything else. I'd love to get another Beyond Institute of Professional Wrestling student show going. That was a lot of fun.
And Foxborough show is on IWTV as well?
Foxborough show is going to be on IWTV, 1 o'clock bell time this Saturday.
All right. Well, we'll see what type of sickos we get for that one, huh?
You might still have a bowl of cereal in your hands. You're sitting there in your Mudandis after watching Tom and Jerry or something. I don't know.
Right. Well, where can we find you on Twitter?
Oh, no, don't follow me on Twitter. I'm such an asshole on Twitter. I give into my what do they call it? The intrusive thoughts. They win when I'm online. I'm old. I can't bite my tongue as much as I did. There's so much stupidity out there. Sometimes I used to say I'm going to sleep on it. If it still bothers me the next day, I'm going to say something. And I would wake up pissed off the next day. So I'd just be thinking about it all night. Like, I want to go for it. Let me go for the throat. And then I said, let me wait till that second day. So something's still bothering me by day 3. Like, it's probably going to find its way to Twitter. Don't follow Beyond Wrestling on Twitter. Follow Beyond Wrestling on Instagram. Follow Beyond Wrestling on Facebook. Pretty much shop IWTV is where anything that you want to spend money on is going to be linked, or beyondwrestlingonline.com for whatever doesn't fall into that category. I don't know what's up with YouTube, man. Some guy hit me up there and there's like, here's 10 things that you should be doing different. And it's like, man, then you run the channel. You know what I mean? You run the channel, right. You show me that there's more money, and then you give me my cut. Like, we did what we did for such a long period of time. People would always say for years, oh, you've got spam bots, you're flubbing the numbers, you're exploiting performers with the thumbnails and stuff like that. Nah, man, we posted like a full match every single day. Some was more popular than the others, but the algorithm rewarded the frequency with which we were posting. There were some videos that it would just take and run with. I don't have control over that. And nobody at YouTube has direct control over that either. We were very beneficial that it was something that happened. But when they started introducing that questionnaire where it's like, please, answer these 21 questions to explain the content of your video, dude, I can't get around the fact that wrestling is violent. I have to check the box. This is mild violence. I have to check the box. There's going to be foul language. I have to check the box that there's going to be stunts. And so our stuff gets shown to a lot less people. YouTube in 2025 isn't what YouTube what it was in 2018. So it's great that we got 3.5 million subscribers. I'm never getting that 10 million subscriber like diamond like shaped trophy that
Logan Paul's got nothing to worry about.
Yeah, exactly. Unless we switch over to format where if I just if I act on YouTube the way that I act on Twitter, maybe we'll get 100 million subscribers. But let's not encourage that kind of behavior. Anyway, follow us, don't follow us. It's going to be good. But if people have the chance to come out to the shows in Worcester or they have the chance to come out to the shows in Rhode Island, especially if you haven't been out in a while, it's only $10 at the door. It's low risk. What's the worst that can happen? You're going to have a bad time over the course of 2 hours, then don't come back next week. My job is to make sure you have such a good time that you're going to want to come back and take somebody. That's what I'm focused on.
Yeah, and we've got some members of this North-South Connection Pod Network that's based out of Rhode Island. So partly why I wanted to bring you on here, get the name out to some more people. Thank you for some time that you spent with me today. You guys that are listening to this, we'll be back in our normal format next week for episode 5. And we're going to start gearing up towards WrestleMania and previewing a lot of that shit coming down the pipeline. So thank you again, Drew, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.